We are here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bring news just for you. It's Wednesday, March 5th here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and great to have you with us on News Generation. Joining us today is Park Ki-yoon.
It's always good to be back.
It's always good to have you back. And Im Sang-yeon.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. So we're going to begin with our show with our keyword news. Our keyword for this Wednesday is social media. A new survey by the Korea Press Foundation reveals an interesting paradox, which is Gen Zers, despite being the most active users of social media, they have the strongest distrust toward it when it comes to obtaining information on social issues like the news. 33.2% of Gen Z respondents said they do not trust social media as a reliable source of news, with video platforms and online communities ranking close behind in terms of distrust. And millennials also expressed skepticism towards social media, though at a slightly lower rate of 27%. Meanwhile, Generation X and older respondents pointed to video platforms as the least credible source of information. So as part of this generation, I would like to ask you, do you relate to these findings? And why do you think the younger generations, despite using social media the most, they tend to distrust it when it comes to getting news or obtaining information?
Well, I can definitely relate to this trend. I think the fantasy of social media is starting to slowly fade out because there has been attempts of creating fake news as well as spread of misinformation throughout social media platforms. And I also try to reduce my screen time on social media these days. And it's not only because I can no longer trust the news that are posted on the social media, but also some of the news are quite exaggerated, and we call this the clickbait, which is writing provocative headlines to allure more readers so that the reporters can get more clicks and views for their news posts. So basically, I think these kind of misinformation and exaggeration of the news articles are what makes people to actually lose their faith in social media platforms.
Right, and I think that they know more that misinformation and exaggeration is out on social media because once again, they are the most active users. So they definitely know more about it when it comes to obtaining information through these platforms. What do you think, Yoon?
I'm on the same page as Hang-yeok. I have refrained from using social media recently for my mental health and physical health, and I feel so much better actually. It feels like I'm actually living the real life outside my smartphone. And when I do look for information, even if I do come across information on social media first, I would always cross-check with different news outlets, including Arirang, of course. And I think the younger generation may have been exposed to social media too much from a very young age. Just growing up, they were just brought up with their phones in their hands. And I think like the sources they receive, it could be very misleading. And just like what Sang-yeok said, it's exaggerated, and once they click it, it's very different to the actual factual news. So I think many youngsters have kind of realized that a lot of news on social media is very provocative and, of course, misleading, which causes misinformation as well. So I think they've come to realize that, maybe it's time to cross-check, fact-check, and not just believe everything that's on social media, because I think social media is mainly focused on entertainment rather than newsworthy things.
Right. So in this vast sea of information, it's always important to cross-check and fact-check. And that was our keyword news for this Wednesday. So we're now going to move on to our main discussion of the day. Wednesday means it's time to explore the latest lifestyle trends among young people. Take a look at the screen to find out more. Last week, we discussed how buy now, pay later services are becoming increasingly popular among young consumers. While these services can be convenient when managed responsibly, the real problem arises when people can no longer keep up with their payments. But being in debt doesn't mean it's the end of the road. Today, we are turning our focus to debt relief programs, how they work, what support they offer, and what young people think about them. So as just mentioned, last week we talked about the status quo of how more young people are drowning in debt. And today we're going to talk about some measures that aim to rescue them. So these programs aim to help those in debt regain financial stability, once again called debt relief programs. So Kyun, could you start us off by walking us through the latest data, once again, on rising debt among young people and some of the most widely used debt relief programs here in Korea?
Sure. As we discussed last week, the outstanding household debt for those under 30 has surged by 25% over the past 5 years. And the number of people in their 20s using the personal workout program that we just talked about, which is a system supported by a credit counseling and recovery service that helps individuals with overdue loans of more than 3 months restructure their debt, has also increased. And the total amount of debt relief granted to them exceeded 1 billion won last year, almost $69 million, marking a 102% increase over the past 4 years. Now, let's take a look at the screen for more details of people under 30 receiving debt relief. The total debt relief amounted to $37 million back in 2020. However, the amount increased twice as much in just 4 years to $75 million. And it is very important to keep in mind that the debt paid back by the Credit Counseling and Recovery Service is actually a government-run organization, meaning that the money that's actually paid to relieve these people in debt is actually tax money paid by all the citizens of Koreans. And this includes those who are actually in debt, who have been paying back their debt or still is paying back their debt in due manner without actually asking for help from these kind of programs.
Right, and this is a reason why some are raising eyebrows over the necessity or providing these debt relief programs. So Kyun just mentioned individual workout programs, but there is actually another major debt relief program that a lot of people in Korea who are struggling with debt are using. So Sang-hyuk, please tell us more about that.
Yes, so I think I must first explain about the personal debt recovery program. It's run by the government. It's basically a debt adjustment programs that exempts people from paying the remaining amount of debt if they pay a certain amount over the next 3 to 5 years when they are unable to repay the full amount of their debts. And half of the applicants turned out to be the MZ generation. So while people in their 40s and 50s usually borrow loans for acquiring living expenses, most of those in their 20s and 30s are actually applying for loans for their investments in stocks or cryptocurrencies. And it seems many ended up buried in debts by heavily investing in risky stocks.
And the numbers that Kyun just mentioned show that. So to sum it up for our viewers, the workout program is a voluntary agreement with creditors, and it mainly focuses on the payment terms rather than wiping out debt. Meanwhile, the personal debt recovery plan, which is also called individual rehabilitation, is a legal process that requires court approval and partial debt forgiveness. It offers it after completing payments. So before we dive deeper into today's topic, we're first going to get a better understanding on how these programs actually work in detail. And to do that, we're going to bring in an expert to our talks. We'll be back after the break.
NewsGen wants to hear from you. Go to YouTube and search our channel Arirang News. Click Community and leave a comment down below. Make a new type of news with us.
So we're now going to bring in Kim Ji-soo, who is an attorney in Korea. Welcome back to the show, Ji-soo.
Good to have you again.
Great to have you back. So Ji-soo, our panelists quickly mentioned two key debt relief programs available in Korea, which is the individual rehabilitation plan and debt workout plans. So could you explain how they work specifically and under what circumstances they are typically used or preferred?
Sure. So both programs are intended to help people who are suffering from debt, but they kind of work in a different ways. So first, individual rehabilitation is a court-supervised process, like you mentioned. So the court steps in to shield debtors from legal actions such as wage garnishments and asset seizures. So from there, the debtor follows a structured repayment plan, usually lasting 3 to 5 years. And compared to that, debt workout plans take a little bit of different approach. It is managed by a credit counseling and recovery service. So they rely on direct negotiations with banks rather than the court intervention. So this program helps by lowering interest rates and extending repayment terms or even reducing the total amount of debt. So in short, individual rehabilitation program provides a legal protection, whereas to debt workout plan offers a more flexible, privately negotiated solution without any court intervention.
Thank you for easily summarizing that. Jisoo, are you seeing an increase in young applicants for these programs? And if so, what do you think is driving this trend?
So definitely, young people are literally drowning in debt like never before. The reasons are clear. And before we delve into the reasons, first, they mostly fall into these three main categories. First, some default on loans as small as $1,000, unable to cover even basic repayments. And secondly, there are groups that are shut out of traditional banks, so they are forced into predatory lenders with crushing interest rates. And lastly, there are groups who are suffering from student loans and student debts, making them financially challenged from the very start of their social lives. So low income, no assets, and rising interest rates trap them in a vicious cycle. And unlike older borrowers with financial cushions, they have no safety net for all. So with limited financial options, debt grows faster than they can repay. So what starts as a setback turns into long-term financial distress.
Okay, Jesus, thank you for the explanation. But the problem here is that some argue that government-backed debt relief programs create moral hazard, essentially questioning whether it's fair to assist individuals who have accumulated debt through risky investments rather than unavoidable circumstances like students' loan you just mentioned. Then what are the broader social costs of operating these programs?
Well, first of all, the social cost is presumably you can expect is a public backlash. So a lot of people who played it safe will gonna feel cheated. So for example, there are homeowners paying high interest will feel frustrated if their tax goes to bail out investors instead of easing their own burdens. And the fairness issue will gonna grow and it's gonna crash our societies overall. And moral hazard also follows. So when bailouts become routine, responsibility fades and hard work loses its meaning when the government picks up the tab. However, I believe that the issue isn't about the program itself. So it is for those who try to exploit it. And the real problem is people drowning in small debts. So not speculators looking for a loophole. And many young borrowers default on under $1,000, as I mentioned before. So they aren't gaming the systems, so they simply can't pay. And it is important for us to fix targets for those who are really in need. And relief should go on to those who truly cannot afford the payments at all. So it's going to keep the cost down and fairness issues intact.
All right, Jisoo, thanks so much for joining our show today. I always appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So we're now going to shift our focus and talk more about public perception. As we mentioned earlier, public opinion seems to be divided. So Kyun, how do young people generally feel about these programs? Do they see this more of as a safety net, or do they see this kind of as an unfair assistance plan?
Well, initially, the individual rehabilitation program was established to address the socio-economic challenges posed by debtors who have lost the ability to repay their loans and can no longer fulfill their roles in society, which are mainly the younger generation. The idea is that government intervention to restructure debt is more desirable than allowing unpaid debt to accumulate, which would increase socioeconomic costs. So if the number of individual debtors continue to rise, the national economy could also be at risk, making such a system very necessary. And more importantly, this program is essential for those who are completely unable to repay their debts. For instance, if someone has fallen victim to jeonse fraud or has taken out loans for living expenses, but is suffering from excessive debt collection by loan sharks, legal protections must be in place to prevent further harm. And for your information, jeonse is a unique rental system here in Korea, where tenants pay a large lump sum deposit, often 60 to 80% of the property's market value, to the landlord instead of paying monthly rent. And the landlord actually repays the jeonse after 2-year contract ends.
Right. So the argument here is that people believe that the cost that comes from snowballing debt is larger than the government stepping in to help people pay off the debt.
You're right.
But on the other hand, there are other opinions too, right, Sang-yeong?
Yeah, so some people question the fairness of this program in the first place because many of these borrowers aren't necessarily vulnerable groups who genuinely need social support, but rather people with poor spending habits or those who took on excessive debt for risky investments. And it's raising concern about this unfair treatments to those people who actually made the investment with their own savings in the first place. So if you consider all of this, many people point out that it would be unfair to those people who invested with their money, and if the government just gives support to those who make aggressive investments. Some also point out that it would create bad spending habits throughout the society. And there's a criticism that these policies could also encourage debt-fueled investments, which means that people could blindly just apply for this recovery program after spending their fortune on risky investments. And another concern is that the idea of the government will bail me out if I fall into debt. And this could, of course, foster misguided financial mindsets. And this will obviously increase the moral hazard in the society as well.
Right, because for some, they might not thoroughly think it over when making big, risky investments. And also, for most people, they kind of view that these investments are not really necessary debts. Unlike student loans.
Because it was their choice to make risky investment.
Right. So to get a broader sense of public opinion, we also asked our viewers for their thoughts. We conducted a poll on the Arirang YouTube channel with the following question. So the question was, do you think it's justifiable for debt relief programs to cover debts accumulated through high-risk investments in stocks or cryptocurrency rather than necessary expenses like student loans or housing? If we look at the results, 89% said no, it's their choice, so they should take responsibility, while 11% answered yes, they deserve a second chance. And we're going to take a look at some comments. Our first comment for this Wednesday is Benny D97. No, because I think investors need to face the consequences of what they did so the government can prevent further damage. Roddy Russell Jr. 93 says, early investors weren't aware of the risk, but now we are. They should invest responsibly. Our final comment for this Wednesday is by Idrasol 99. It depends on the type of support the government provides. Reducing interest rates to help them repay is reasonable, but outright debt forgiveness shifts the burden to society, which is unfair. Right, we're now going to take a look at the situation in other parts of the world. So are we seeing similar debt relief programs in other countries, Kyun?
Yes, other countries have also faced social issues related to personal debt and have experimented with various debt relief policies. In the United States, for example, following the 2008 financial crisis, the government implemented a mortgage modification program, injecting $30 billion to provide debt relief. And this in turn helped quickly reduce the household debt ratio. So it has worked in the past in the States.
I see. Then could you give us some other examples too?
Yeah, so let's move the world map to Europe. We have Iceland and the UK, and these countries are often cited as success stories for their debt recovery programs, as they effectively reduced household debts by using systematic financial support. On the other hand, Spain also implemented similar programs due to high debt burdens in their society. But as financial companies and institutions suffer from aggravated financial burden, it eventually led to slow debt reduction and sluggish economic recovery.
Once again, which leaves us with a lot to think about. Now, at the end of the day, nobody wants to struggle with financial hardships such as debt, but life is unpredictable and anyone can find themselves facing debt at some point in their lives. So what do you think is the best approach to debt management? How can young people avoid falling into a big financial crisis while still making investments or purchases that are necessary?
That's a very good question and a very difficult one to answer. But I think we are currently living in a world of uncertainty with ongoing wars, including a tariff war, extreme climate changes, and even a political turmoil that is yet to be settled here in Korea. And I think furthermore, young people had to go through COVID-19 during the most important years of their growing up as adults. And I don't think they were fully prepared to adapt to the new norm. And on top of that, we had the economic downturn. So it didn't really help the youngsters to really adapt to the new change. And they were very easily influenced because rising house costs, and they were very discouraged to live a proper life like their parents. So they fell into the trap of this high risk, high return in a short amount of time investment method. And I think this could have been very much prevented if they had been better educated in school instead of. I got nothing against math, science, but if they were taught more practical things in life, you know, how to save up money, how to spend your money, financing that as well, and like reading the global economy as well. So I don't really blame the youngsters for making these kind of mistakes, but because we have the government, there's always a second chance, and I think if they do receive the second chance, they should really learn from what they made, the mistake they made, and make better, wise decisions moving forward. But there are also like fairness issues that comes to the surface. But I think, I mean, they're still young. Give them a second chance to amend their mistakes.
I mean, forward. I think that everybody deserves a second chance, but don't exploit these opportunities by making very big, risky investments. What do you think, Sang-yeon?
Yeah, so if I just echo what Ki-eun said and what Jisoo mentioned in the interview, so the program itself doesn't have any faults. It's actually those who try to exploit the existing programs. So I think the most idealistic support program would be to block people from drowning into that in the first place. And especially I think government should at least provide a minimum amount of support to the vulnerable groups when it comes to their household spendings. And as for financial institutions, I think more regulations should be put in place to set back people from making aggressive investments in cryptocurrencies and stocks. Because as we know that Bitcoins are going viral across the globe, these kind of new assets are still questionable when it comes to their credibility.
And as individuals, maybe we can help or we can work on building our financial literacy. And that's all we have for today here on News Generation, but we will be back tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. Korea time. Great, then thanks today to Park Ki-eun.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you, and Im Sang-yeok.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and to our viewers, thank you for tuning in today, and please look forward to more topics we have throughout the week. We are
News Generation.